royal mistresses who almost became queens. Thank you to Toon Blast for sponsoring this video. Through most of history, monarchs selected wives for their royal blood and political significance. Women they actually liked and were attracted to were relegated to being mere mistresses. These women were usually local aristocrats or even commoners who would not be considered contenders to be consort. The majority of monarchs had mistresses, and their wives usually looked the other way, safe in the knowledge that their place as queen could never be usurped. But a number of royal courtesans did come to wield great power. In a recent episode, we met 8 royal mistresses who beat the odds and succeeded to become queen. Today, let's meet another 8 lovely ladies who came so close, but because of ruined romances, royal family resentment, or early death, just barely missed out on the crown. Christina Rochichana, almost Queen of Poland, was born in Prague in what is now Czechia, where her father was the mayor. She wed a much older, prosperous merchant, who left her a vast fortune when he died. Krystyna became a lady-in-waiting at the court of Holy Roman Emperor Charles IV. In 1356, Casimir III, King of Poland, visited the emperor. He was known as Casimir the Great for transforming war-torn Poland into a wealthy kingdom and doubling its size. His first wife, Aldona of Lithuania, gave birth to 2 daughters and died at 29. Casimir was not impressed with his second political bride, Adelaide of Hesse, and was contemplating ways to dump her when Krystyna caught his eye. The emperor encouraged the romance, and the king soon took Krystyna back to Krakow and married her. Casimir kicked Queen Adelaide out, but he didn't bother to officially divorce her. The ex-consort headed for Hungary, where she complained to Casimir's sister, Queen Elizabeth, of the terrible treatment she had suffered. Adelaide's protests went all the way up to the Pope, who declared the Polish king's 3rd marriage bigamous. Once the haze of lust dissipated, Casimir seems to have gone cold on Krystyna. She had been concealing hair loss and a bad case of scabies. The king also realized that his nobles would never accept children he had with a commoner bride as legitimate heirs to the throne. And as he had only daughters, he needed a male heir to secure the succession. Some records claim that Krystyna and Casimir's relationship ended in months, while others cite her presence at the royal court for 7 years. Either way, their marriage was considered morganatic. A morganatic marriage is between 2 people of unequal status. It prevents the higher-ranking person from passing on titles or property to their lower-ranking spouse or shared children. Krystyna was unpopular with the Polish people. She supposedly ordered a peasant's hut to be burned down because it was blocking her view. Casimir declared himself divorced from Krystyna, but again he failed to file the proper papal paperwork. So he forged a papal dispensation to allow him to marry wife number 4, Hedwig of Zagan. She gave birth to 3 more daughters. Casimir died at 60, and as he had no sons, the throne passed to his nephew, Louis I. Krystyna stayed in Poland for at least 2 years after being dumped, but what became of her is not known. Royal mistresses were under constant pressure to play politics, look after royal children, and keep the king happy. When they needed a distraction from the stress of life, they often played games like 9 Men's Morris, backgammon, or reverses. And today, when I need a brief escape from the pressures of life, I love to play Toon Blast. This free-to-play mobile game has great graphics, engaging team challenges, and cute characters. Solve puzzles by blasting cubes and creating powerful combinations to pass levels. It strikes the perfect balance between low stress and challenging enough to keep you interested. And you don't need Wi-Fi, so you can play anywhere. My favorite part? You won't get interrupted by a ton of annoying ads. Toon Blast for free using my link in the description or with this QR code and get 3 hours of unlimited lives and 100 free coins. And now back to history. Gabrielle d'Estrées, almost Queen of France, was born at the chateau of her father, the Marquis du Coeuvres. When she was 17, 37-year-old Henri III, King of Navarre, a small kingdom in northern Spain, fell in love with her. He already had a wife and numerous mistresses, but Gabrielle quickly became his favorite. Henri was openly affectionate with her and flaunted their relationship. Gabrielle's father was anxious about her reputation, so wed her to a local noble. But the bride and groom rarely saw each other, as Gabrielle spent all her time with the king. She accompanied him on military campaigns. While heavily pregnant, she insisted on sleeping in his tent and making sure that his clothes were clean and that he ate well. She was intelligent and practical. Henri confided in her and followed her advice. She wrote his correspondence. Henri was embroiled in the French Wars of Religion. He had seized the throne of France after the assassination of Catholic King Henri III. But because he was Protestant, the powerful Catholic League refused to allow him to be crowned or enter the capital. Gabrielle was Catholic herself and advised her lover to convert. Henri responded, "Paris is well worth a mass." He renounced Protestantism and was crowned King Henri IV of France in 1594. Next, he arranged for Gabrielle's marriage to be annulled and ordered the government to recognize her as the official royal mistress and their 4 children as his. He created her Duchess du Beaufort and gave her Chateau du Monsieur. But Gabrielle was unpopular with the aristocracy, and malicious pamphlets blamed her for the nation's ills. She was given the nickname the Duchess of Filth. Gabrielle worked with his Protestant sister, Catherine of Bourbon, to negotiate peace. With her help, Henri signed the Edict of Nantes, which ended the wars. He gave both Gabrielle and Catherine sets of gold keys, which bestowed upon them seats on his council. Henri's wife, Queen Margaret of Valois, was among the Catholics who wouldn't budge. She had not provided the king with any legitimate offspring, and he saw no reason not to leave her for his brilliant mistress, who had already given him 2 healthy sons and another one on the way. Henri applied to the Pope for an annulment and permission to marry Gabrielle. He gave his love a coronation ring and promised to make her Queen of France. Thrilled, she replied, "Only God or the king's death could put an end to my good luck." She jinxed herself. A few days later, she went into labor and suffered eclampsia. The king raced to be with her, but Gabrielle and the baby died before he arrived. Henri was devastated and suspected poison. He was the first French monarch to wear black in mourning. He gave Gabrielle a funeral fit for a queen. While buried in grief, the 46-year-old monarch was easy prey for an opportunistic 20-year-old courtier. Catherine Henriette du Balzac d'Entragues, almost Queen of France. Her mother had been a favorite mistress of King Charles IX. Catherine looked a bit like Gabrielle, but had nothing of her kindness. She was charming and intriguing, but grasping and tempestuous. Before surrendering her virtue to the king, she demanded 100,000 crowns. Catherine coaxed the king into a written promise to marry her and make her queen, which she flaunted in the faces of numerous courtiers. But the king did not honor the promise and instead took a political bride, Marie de Medici. Catherine, heavily pregnant, flew into a rage in front of the whole court. But she remained as the king's mistress and the new queen's lady-in-waiting. She was perpetually disrespectful to Her Majesty. Catherine delivered a son within weeks of the birth of Queen Marie's first son. Both women had daughters at the same time. The king legitimized Catherine's son and named him Duc du Verneuil. The frustrated queen tried to expel Catherine from court, but the king was too enamored with her. Marie only succeeded in driving a wedge into her own marriage. Catherine became embroiled in a plot to make her son King of Spain. The intrigue was foiled, but the king forgave her. While riding through Paris, the royal coach was stopped in traffic. A Catholic zealot took the opportunity to stab Henri to death. After his assassination, the queen was made regent for her 9-year-old son, King Louis XIII. She immediately expelled Catherine from court. She lived another 23 years and died at 54. Francoise du Bois, almost Queen of France, was born outside a prison in Paris. Her father was a Protestant conspirator who seduced the daughter of his jailer. When his sentence was up, he took his family to the Caribbean colony of Martinique and abandoned them there. Francois' mother was able to get her children back to France, but she promptly died. Francoise was taken in by her maternal aunt, who gave her a few happy years. She thrived in a Protestant education, rich in literature and science. But when her godmother learned of this, she insisted Francoise be sent to a convent. She resented her now limited education, but became a devoted Catholic. When Francoise was 17, she was introduced into high society. She met Paul Scoron, a disabled poet 25 years her senior. She was more of a nurse than a wife to Paul, but they got on well and he encouraged her to further her education. After 8 years, Paul died. His royal patronage stopped and Francoise was left penniless. She had a fateful meeting with King Louis XIV's favorite mistress, Madame de Montespan. She liked Francoise so much that she asked her to be a governess to her children. Montespan didn't see Francoise as a threat to her relationship with the king. The new nanny was decent-looking but not especially beautiful, and was 3 years older than Louis. But he was drawn to her intelligence and steady nature, in contrast to Montespan's temper and theatrics. The king and the nanny spent many hours together discussing philosophy, science, and politics. He rewarded her with 200,000 livres, which she used to purchase an estate at Maintenon. The king created her Marquise de Maintenon. Montespan grew jealous and fought with Maintenon frequently over the children. But in 1682, Montespan was accused of using love potions to keep the king's attention, and she was banished from the palace. Maintenon took her place at the king's side. His queen, Marie-Thérèse, had been treated rudely by Montespan, but Francoise respected her. On her deathbed at 44, the queen gave Francoise a ring from her own finger as a token of esteem. A few months later, Francoise and the king were married in a secret midnight ceremony. She only went to bed with the king after they were married. Louis, who had been famous for his many lovers, didn't take any more mistresses. The union was morganatic, but Francoise became queen in all but name. Francoise was given grand apartments opposite the king's. She was wise and wielded incredible political power, and was an unofficial prime minister. She founded a school for impoverished girls. In 1715, King Louis died of gangrene at 76. Francoise had been his companion for 3 decades. She lived another 4 years. She was visited by Peter the Great of Russia, who said she had done a great service to France. Francoise died at 83. Our fourth and final almost queen of France, the French really did love their mistresses, was Marie-Amelie du Joly-Duchamp. She was a lady-in-waiting to King Louis XIV's favorite illegitimate daughter. The princess was especially close to her legitimate brother, the heir to the throne, Louis le Grand Dauphin. After the death of his wife, Marie Anne Victoria of Bavaria, he went to visit his sister to be consoled. Marie-Amelie soon began to cheer him up. Everyone was shocked as she was considered quite ugly, but the Dauphin was drawn to her spirituality. She was not too holy for an intrigue. Marie-Amélie was already in love with the Count from Luxembourg. The lovers plotted to conceive a child together and pass it off as Louis', thereby cuckolding the Dauphin and possibly even taking control of the French throne. It might have worked, as Louis was not the brightest jewel in the crown. It was said he could pass a whole day simply tapping his cane against his foot. But he was kind, generous, and moral. When letters exposing the plot were presented to the king, he ordered Marie-Amélie and the Count expelled from France. The dull Dauphin remained infatuated and soon brought Marie-Amélie back. They wed in a secret ceremony. Without the Count's influence, she was devoted to her husband. Because of her low birth, she was not styled Dauphine of France or welcomed at her father-in-law's court. But she was friendly with Francoise du Bois. At her own palace, she hosted dukes and diplomats who treated her as a future queen. And she might have been crowned had Louis lived to be king. He died of smallpox at 49, predeceasing his father. A year later, his son, Louis, Duke of Burgundy, died of measles at 29. When King Louis XIV died, the throne went to his 5-year-old great-grandson, Louis XV. The Dauphin left Marie-Amélie with an enormous fortune, but she tore up the will, saying, "When he was alive, I needed only him, and after his death, only a pittance." She was pregnant and delivered a son, who died at the age of 2. Marie-Amélie lived on a small pension and devoted herself to charity. She was widely respected for her virtue and died at 62. Rosa, Rosina Verchelana, almost Queen of Italy, was born in Nice, then part of the Kingdom of Sardinia, now France. Her father had been a Napoleonic imperial guard. In 1815, Napoleon was defeated, and the empire he had conquered mostly reverted back to its original kingdoms. The King of Sardinia appointed Rosa's father commander of his hunting estate, Racconigi. It was there that 14-year-old Rosa met married 27-year-old Crown Prince Victor Emmanuel. Within a year, Rosa gave birth to a daughter. A year after that, their relationship caused scandal when Victor Emmanuel was crowned King of Sardinia. Queen Adelaide of Austria died at 32 of burns sustained when her dress caught fire. She had given the king 8 children, and he wasn't interested in remarrying. But he did make Rosa a contessa, recognized their children, and gave her La Mondria castle. For nearly 1,000 years, the Italian peninsula had been divided into separate kingdoms, which frequently fought each other over territory. Sardinia was a kingdom in the northwest. Victor Emmanuel sent troops to aid the French and British in the Crimean War. They then supported him, taking over the Kingdom of Two Sicilies in the south and unifying all of Italy. In 1861, Victor Emmanuel became the first king of Italy. Rosa moved to the Villa La Pietraia near the new capital of Florence. 5 years later, the king fell gravely ill. To cleanse his soul of sin, he hurriedly married his mistress. The religious ceremony did not make her his legal wife. The king recovered and spent another 8 years with his bride. They were finally wed in a civil ceremony which made Rosa his morganatic wife, but not his queen. 2 months later, the king died at 57. Rosa lived another 8 years to 52. Victor Emmanuel's son, King Umberto I, refused to allow his stepmother to be buried next to his father, so her children built her a replica mausoleum in Turin. In 1970, the mausoleum was broken into by grave robbers looking for jewels. It fell into disrepair, but was renovated in 2005. Catherine Dolgoryukov, almost Empress of Russia, was the daughter of an impoverished prince. She first met Tsar Alexander II when he was 39 and she was only 10. He admired her but did not yet make a move. When her father died, the Tsar paid for Catherine and her siblings to attend an elite boarding school. Once she was 16, he began visiting her and taking her out for walks and carriage rides. He then appointed her a lady-in-waiting to his wife, who was suffering from tuberculosis. Alexander had 6 children by Empress Maria of Hesse and by Rhine, and a number of illegitimate children with at least 3 other mistresses. Young Catherine enjoyed his attention, and her mother and headmistress urged her to sleep with him and better her family's circumstances. But she refused to become just another mistress. The Tsar's eldest son, Tsarevich Nikolai, died suddenly of meningitis at 21. The emperor was devastated, and 19-year-old Catherine did the one thing she could to cheer him up. She slept with him. That night, he told her, "Now you are my secret wife. I swear that if I am ever free, I will marry you." He rented her a mansion in St. Petersburg, and police escorted her 2 or 3 times a week to a private apartment in the Winter Palace for trysts. The emperor sketched Catherine in the nude. She gave birth to 4 children. While in labor with her 3rd, she demanded to be carried to the Winter Palace, where she delivered a son, Boris, in the emperor's room. But the baby was taken to Catherine's mansion while she recovered. Without his mother, he caught a cold and died. The people were growing restless under centuries of economic despair, and resentment towards the privileged classes was reaching a fever pitch. Assassination attempts against the Tsar were regular occurrences. A bomb was detonated in the dining room of the palace. In the chaos, Alexander didn't bother to check on his wife or his children, but ran straight upstairs to Catherine's room, shouting, "Katya, my dear Katya." The emperor feared that she would be targeted, so he moved her into the Winter Palace. The court was horrified that the dying Tsarina would have to see Catherine and her children, but on her deathbed, magnanimous Marie kissed and blessed her husband's other children. As soon as the mourning period of 30 days was over, Alexander married Catherine. He granted her the title Princess Yurievskaya, but stipulated that their children would not be in the succession. The marriage was incredibly unpopular. Friends begged him to reconsider, and ladies-in-waiting resigned. Alexander's favorite daughter, Maria, accused Catherine of using witchcraft to ensnare him. At a ball, Maria Fyodrovna, wife of the Tsarevich, refused to kiss Catherine, and she would not allow their children to play together. Catherine struggled under the vitriol. The emperor was unperturbed and acted like a teenage boy in her presence. He wrote to his sister, "She prefers to renounce all amusements desired of young ladies of her age. She lives only for me." He wanted to have her crowned empress. But on the 13th of March, 1881, Catherine had a premonition and begged her husband not to go out. He quieted her worries by making love to her on a table, and then left. While riding through Moscow, a bomb was thrown at the emperor's coach. He was carried back to the palace with his legs torn away, his stomach ripped open, and his face mutilated. Catherine ran half-dressed into the room and fell across him, crying, "Sasha, Sasha." She held him as he was given last rites and died 15 minutes later. Her pink negligee was soaked in his blood. The imperial family refused Catherine and her children entry to the Tsar's funeral, so they stood in the doorway of the church. The new Tsar did offer his stepmother a pension if she would move out of the palace. She took her children to Paris, and they summered on the French Riviera. She lived in style for 41 years, though she was repeatedly snubbed by Russian aristocrats. Catherine died in 1922, age 74. Wallace Simpson, almost Queen of the United Kingdom, was born in Baltimore, Maryland. Her widowed mother came from money but was left impoverished. Wealthy relatives paid for Wallace to attend an elite boarding school. There she dreamt of achieving the status and luxury of her classmates. At 19, she wed Navy pilot Earl Spencer, who was an abusive alcoholic. The couple spent a year in China, where Wallace had an affair with an Italian count. She may have had a botched abortion, which left her infertile. Wallace and Earl returned stateside and filed for divorce. She moved on to British-American shipping executive Ernest Simpson, who left his wife and daughter for her. They moved to London, bought a luxury flat, and foxtrotted in the highest echelons of society. But in the stock market crash of 29, they lost a fortune. They continued to live beyond their means, but their money worries were mounting. Wallace was introduced to Edward, Prince of Wales, at a house party. When his mistress, Thelma Furness, had to leave on a trip, she asked her good friend Wallace to keep the prince company. Upon Thelma's return, she found she'd been replaced. Wallace bullied the prince and treated him like a naughty child. Edward, who had long squirmed under the pressure of his position, couldn't get enough of her dominance. There were rumors that he was impotent, and that Wallace was the only woman who knew how to satisfy him. He became obsessed with her, followed her around like a puppy, and showered her with expensive gifts. Wallace found Edward boring and immature, and she and Ernest secretly called him Peter Pan. Ernest was well paid to look the other way. To keep up appearances, the trio often went on holiday together. In 1936, King George V died, leaving the throne to 41-year-old Edward VIII. He refused to take the job seriously. Government ministers were reluctant to send him documents for fear that Wallace would read them. She was having an affair with the German ambassador and passing him secrets. He sent her 17 carnations a day for each time they had slept together. Wallace expected that the king would eventually move on and that she could return to her husband, jewels in hand. But Edward required her constant attention. Ernest began having an affair of his own. Desperate to get him back, Wallace tried to break up with the king, but he threatened to kill himself. Ernest filed for divorce, and Wallace was stuck with Edward. It was some consolation that he wanted to marry her and make her queen. The prime minister informed the king that the people would never accept her as queen. Divorce was forbidden by the Church of England, of which Edward was now titular head. And the government had serious concerns about her Nazi sympathies. Edward, who had never wanted to be king anyway, chose Wallace. He abdicated after 11 months, passing the throne to his younger brother, George VI. He was intensely shy and had a stutter, but with the help of his charismatic wife Elizabeth, became incredibly popular and saw the UK through World War II. Edward was given the title Duke of Windsor and encouraged to leave the country. He married Wallace in France. The new king gave him a generous allowance, but denied Wallace the title Her Royal Highness. Edward called George every day to complain and demand more money. In 1937, the Duke and Duchess visited Germany and met Adolf Hitler. The Fuhrer had plans to invade England and install Edward as a puppet king. The former king recorded a BBC broadcast in which he begged the UK to give Germany what it wanted, but it was never aired. As World War II broke out around them, Edward and Wallace vacationed in Spain and were oblivious to the suffering around them. Wallace even asked that her favorite bathing suit be couriered to her by an American soldier across battle lines. Winston Churchill threatened to court-martial the Duke if he didn't get out of Europe and report to the Bahamas to serve as governor. Edward expressed racist views about the islanders and commented, "I never thought Hitler was such a bad chap." After the war, the couple returned to France. When George VI died of lung cancer in 1952, Edward watched his niece Elizabeth II's coronation on TV. The royal family never forgave him for abandoning his duty. Edward did become a mentor to teenage Prince Charles. The Duke and Duchess lived a celebrity lifestyle well beyond their means. They relied on the French government to grant them a free villa and tax exemption. They made ends meet through backdoor government favors and illegal currency trading. Wallace continued to be witty and charming, while Edward was a bore and acquaintances dreaded sitting next to him at parties. Edward suffered an aneurysm and throat cancer. Queen Elizabeth came to visit her uncle, and he died 10 days later at 77. He was privately interred at the Royal Burial Grounds at Frogmore. Wallace lived another 14 years and was financially supported by the Queen. She died in 1986, age 89, and was buried next to Edward. Download Toon Blast for free using my link in the description and get 3 hours of unlimited lives and 100 free coins. A special thank you goes to my patron, Carrie Wilson Bridges. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other royal history videos. If you really want to help, please consider supporting me on Patreon. A link is in the description. Thank you for watching.